Ferns and Fireworks by Renee Rose Hawthorne. Chapter 1, Sparks. The July heat pressed against Rosa Alvarez's skin like a lover's whisper as she emerged from the Art Center's air-conditioned sanctuary. The Riverside Arts Center's lawn stretched before her, a patchwork quilt of families and folding chairs beneath the relentless Colorado sun. The air shimmered with barbecue smoke and the sweet perfume of kettle corn. Children's laughter mixed with the distant thrum of classic rock from someone's portable speaker. She paused on the steps, wiping clay dust from her paint-stained jeans with hands that still trembled slightly from anticipation. Tonight, the sky would become her canvas, just as it had been her grandfather's canvas when he returned from Vietnam, her father's when he came back from Desert Storm, and her brother Miguel's after his tours in Afghanistan. The Alvarez family had been painting the heavens over Riverside for 4 generations, each explosion a prayer of gratitude for those who'd served, those who'd returned, and those who hadn't. The weight of her grandfather's dog tags pressed against her collarbone beneath her shirt, a familiar comfort she wore every 4th. She remembered his whisper on his deathbed 3 years ago. "Mija, you keep the light burning for all of us." She would. She always did. Rosa made her way toward the refreshment table where the local community club had set up their annual spread. Ribs glistened like amber under aluminum foil, corn on the cob steamed beside industrial tubs of butter, and the air hung thick with the scent of charcoal. She grabbed a soda from the ice-filled tub, the condensation immediately beating on the can in the dry heat. As she turned, movement caught her eye near the recycling station. A tall man with broad shoulders was carefully positioning handmade signs around a collection of earth-tone bins. His dark brown curls caught the late afternoon light as he bent to adjust a placard that read, "Art Protects Earth," in flowing, hand-painted letters. There was something almost meditative about his movements, as if even the angle of a recycling sign mattered in some grand environmental equation. Rosa found herself studying the line of his jaw, the way his faded denim shirt stretched across his back as he worked. When he straightened and pushed those unruly curls from his forehead, she caught a glimpse of intense green eyes and felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She walked closer, boots crunching on the drought-brittle grass. "Need a hand with that?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. He turned, and those green eyes widened slightly before a slow smile spread across his face. Up close, she could see the paint under his fingernails. Different colors than her clay-stained hands, but artist's hands nonetheless. He extended one of those paint-stained hands. "I'm Owen Brooks." His grip was warm, calloused. "Environmental sculptor and painter. I'm trying to catch as much waste as possible before it ends up in the river." She held his hand a moment longer than was necessary, noting the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. "Rosa Alvarez, 4th-generation pyrotechnician. We're painting the sky tonight." The smile faltered just slightly. "Ah." He released her hand and gestured toward the darkening horizon where her crew was already setting up. "Beautiful work, I'm sure. Though I have to admit, I worry about what comes down after it goes up into the night sky." Heat that had nothing to do with the July sun flashed through her. "Excuse me?" Owen's tone remained diplomatically calm as he said, "The fallout." Something flickered in those green eyes. Challenge, maybe, or disappointment. Cardboard casings, plastic components, chemical residue, it all has to land somewhere, usually in the river where the herons and turtles... Rosa waved her hands and cut him off, her throat going tight. "It's tradition." Her voice came sharper than she'd intended. The dog tags seemed to burn against her skin. "My grandfather shot fireworks over this river when he came home from Vietnam. My father when he returned from the Gulf. My brother after 3 tours in Afghanistan. This isn't just some random light show. It's remembrance. It's honor. Owen's expression softened, but he didn't back down. I understand tradition has meaning, but traditions can evolve, can't they? There are ways to honor service members that don't require poisoning the water they fought to protect. The words hit like a physical blow. Poisoning? Rosa's voice rose enough that a few nearby families glanced their way. We use biodegradable materials whenever possible. We clean up afterward. We're not some fly-by-night operation dumping toxic waste in the river. He held up a hand. I didn't mean to imply... She stepped closer. Yes, you did. She was close enough to catch the scent of turpentine and cedar that clung to his clothes. You took one look at what I do and decided I'm part of the problem. You don't know anything about my family, about what this means to us, about the veterans who come back year after year because this is the one night they feel truly celebrated. Owen ran a hand through his curls, and for a moment, uncertainty flickered across his features. You're right. I made assumptions. But Rosa... The way he said her name sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. The river ecosystem is dying. Microplastics, chemical runoff, noise pollution that disrupts nesting patterns. Every little bit matters. She crossed her arms. So does honoring the people who serve this country. My grandfather was exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. You want to talk about environmental damage? He spent his last years coughing up pieces of his lungs because of chemicals the military dumped in foreign rivers. But he still came to every fireworks show because it reminded him that his sacrifice meant something. Something shifted in Owen's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. I'm sorry for your loss. The genuine sympathy in his voice caught her off guard, deflating some of her anger. Thank you. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, awareness crackling between them like static electricity before a storm. Around them, the festival continued. Children shrieking with delight as they chased each other with red, white, and blue pinwheels, the distant sound of a mariachi band warming up near the food trucks. Look, Rosa said finally, I know you think what we do is harmful. But maybe you should watch tonight's show before you judge. See what it means to people. Then we can talk about whether it's worth preserving. Owen studied her face, his gaze lingering on her lips before meeting her eyes again. I'll watch, but I'll also be taking notes on the environmental impact. She lifted her chin defiantly. Fine, and I'll help you clean up tomorrow morning. We can count every piece of debris together. He extended his hand again. Deal. Though I should warn you, I'm very thorough when it comes to environmental assessment. And I should warn you, she replied, holding his gaze even as her heart hammered against her ribs. I'm very passionate about defending my family's legacy. She hated how she noticed the electric attraction of him, even though she wanted to prove him wrong. From across the lawn, Miguel's voice cut through the evening air. Rosa, we need you for setup. She reluctantly released Owen's hand, already missing the warmth of his touch. Showtime. As she jogged toward the equipment trucks, she could feel his eyes following her. When she glanced back, he was still watching, notebook now in hand, expression unreadable. Chapter 2. Ignition. Twilight painted the Arkansas River in shades of violet and gold as Rosa made her final preparations. The mortar tubes stood in perfect rows along the floating platform like an army of silent sentinels, each one loaded with carefully crafted artistry. Her father, Roberto, moved between the racks with practiced efficiency, his graying mustache twitching as he double-checked fuse alignments. Miguel worked beside him, his movements still carrying the precise economy of motion he'd learned in the military. You seem distracted, mija, Roberto observed without looking up from the electrical connections. Everything okay? Rosa knelt beside her personal rack of shells, each one a small masterpiece she'd crafted herself over the past months. Magenta chrysanthemums that would bloom like desert flowers, emerald willows that would weep tears of light, cobalt peonies that would unfurl like ocean waves, gold crackling stars that would scatter like her grandfather's memories of Christmas mornings in Manila before the war. She shifted her shoulders in a half shrug. Just thinking about Abuelo. It was true enough. She didn't mention the environmental sculptor with the challenging green eyes who'd somehow managed to work his way under her skin in the span of a 10-minute conversation. Miguel paused in his work, following her gaze toward the grassy berm where spectators were beginning to gather. Speaking of thinking, isn't that your new friend over there? The guy with the recycling bins? Rosa's pulse quickened as she spotted Owen's familiar silhouette against the darkening sky. He sat alone on a blanket, notebook balanced on his knees, watching the setup with the focused intensity of a scientist observing an experiment. Even from this distance, she could feel the weight of his attention. She shook her head. "He's not my friend," she muttered, then immediately felt foolish for the defensive tone. Miguel's growing grin was infuriatingly knowing. "Right. That's why you've been checking to see if he's watching every 30 seconds. I have not, Rosa." Roberto's voice carried the gentle authority that had guided her through childhood's scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks. "The man has set up a cleanup station. That shows respect, even if he disagrees with what we do. Perhaps there's more to him than you think." Before she could respond, the first wave of veterans began arriving at the VIP section near the platform. Rosa watched as they settled into lawn chairs with careful movements that spoke of old injuries and older memories. Mrs. Patterson, whose husband had died at Normandy. The Martinez brothers, both Vietnam vets who came together every year despite barely speaking the rest of the time. Sarah Chen, still healing from her third tour in Iraq, always sitting slightly apart from the others. This was why they did it. Not for the tourists or the Instagram photos, but for the quiet dignity on weathered faces when the first rocket climbed toward the stars. Roberto started the countdown with a shout. 5 minutes! Rosa positioned herself at the main control board, her fingers dancing over the switches in a final check. The sequence was burned into her memory. 22 minutes of carefully orchestrated beauty building to a finale that would leave the entire valley breathless. Each shell told part of a story. The whisper quiet launch that honored those who'd served in secret, the massive golden chrysanthemum that bloomed for 43 seconds in memory of the local boys lost in Korea, the patriotic red, white, and blue cascade that brought the crowd to its feet every year. Through her peripheral vision, she caught Owen raising what looked like binoculars, studying the setup, no doubt, taking notes for his environmental impact assessment. Let him look. Let him see what real artistry looked like when it painted the heavens. Roberto's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. "Ready, mija?" She smiled. "Ready, papa?" The first shell lifted into the darkness with a sound like silk tearing. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then light exploded across the sky in a perfect red chrysanthemum, and the crowd's collective gasp of wonder rose like incense toward the stars. Rosa triggered the second cue, then the third, her hands moving with the precision of a pianist performing a beloved concerto. Blue starbursts echoed brushstrokes against the night canvas. Silver strobes glimmered like scattered sequins. Each explosion was a prayer, a memory, a promise kept to those who'd served. On the berm, Owen was indeed taking notes, but his pen had stilled in his hand. Even from this distance, she could see the way his face had tilted upward, caught in wonder despite himself. The show built layer by layer, color bleeding into color like watercolors in rain. Rosa felt her heart lifting with each cue, the familiar rush of creation flowing through her veins like liquid starlight. This was why she'd learned the family trade. why she spent months crafting each individual shell, why she'd never seriously considered any other path in life. But as the display reached its crescendo, she found herself noticing things she'd never paid attention to before. The way smoke drifted down to settle on the river's surface, the cardboard casings that would rain down on the park grass, the chemical scent that would linger in the air for hours. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "Don't let him get in your head." The finale sequence began with a low rumble that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Golden shells climbed higher than any before them, hanging at the apex of their arc for one perfect moment before erupting into cascading waterfalls of light. The crowd was on its feet now, cheering and applauding as the sky filled with liquid gold. In that moment, watching hundreds of faces upturned in wonder and joy, Rosa felt the familiar fierce pride swell in her chest. This was her gift to the world. This was her family's legacy. The last echo faded across the valley, leaving only the whisper of settling smoke and the rustle of debris beginning its earthward journey. Stars reclaimed their domain one by one as the crowd's applause rolled like thunder across the water. On the berm, Owen was standing now, notebook forgotten at his feet. Even in silhouette, she could see the emotion on his face. And when he raised his hands to clap, the gesture seemed torn from him against his will. Their eyes met across the distance, and Rosa felt something shift between them. Not agreement, exactly, but understanding, perhaps. Recognition of something beautiful, even if they disagreed about its cost. Tomorrow, they would count that cost together. Tonight, she would bask in the afterglow of creation and try to ignore the way her heart raced when he gazed at her through the settling smoke. Chapter 3. Fallout. Dawn came softly to Riverside Park, mist rising from the Arkansas River like the ghosts of last night's dreams. Rosa arrived first, hiking boots crunching on dew-dampened grass, trash bags and picker tools swinging from her utility belt. The air still carried the faint metallic tang of gunpowder, a scent that would forever remind her of mornings like this, the quiet aftermath of celebration, when the real work began. She knelt in the grass where the first shells had fallen, her practiced eye spotting the telltale signs of debris, cardboard casings, some still warm to the touch, scraps of colored tissue paper that had once been butterfly wings of light, bits of plastic timing devices, their purpose fulfilled and their usefulness ended. Each piece she collected felt heavier this morning, weighted with the memory of green eyes watching from the hillside, of questions she'd never thought to ask herself. Footsteps approached through the morning quiet, and she looked up to see Owen walking toward her, a steaming travel mug in each hand and what looked like a modified rake slung over his shoulder. He traded yesterday's paint-stained clothes for work jeans and a faded gray t-shirt that did interesting things to the muscles in his arms. He held out one of the mugs. Peace offering. The rich scent of coffee mixed with something spicier. Cinnamon, maybe, or cardamom. She accepted the mug gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. I never turned down caffeine. The first sip revealed coffee that was probably twice as expensive as anything she typically drank, smooth and complex with undertones of chocolate. This is really good. Owen settled beside her on the grass with easy grace. Ethiopian beans from a fair trade co-op. I figure if I'm going to be addicted to something, it might as well be ethically sourced. Of course it was. Rosa bit back a smile. Let me guess. You also only eat organic, locally grown vegetables and drive an electric car. Hybrid, actually. And I make exceptions for really good tacos. His eyes crinkled with self-deprecating humor. I know how I sound. Preachy environmentalist with a savior complex. Rosa picked up another shell casing. I wasn't going to say savior complex, But since you mentioned it, Owen laughed. A rich sound that did something warm and complicated to her insides. Touché. Though for the record, last night was not what I expected. Oh! She tried to keep her tone casual, but her pulse quickened. What did you expect? He ran a hand over his face. Honestly, gaudy spectacle. Mindless entertainment for people who don't think about consequences. He gestured toward his notebook, which lay open beside him, filled with sketches rather than the itemized list of environmental violations she'd anticipated. Instead, I saw art, real artistry. The way you built those sequences, the timing, the color relationships, it was like watching a master painter work on a canvas the size of the sky. Heat rose in her cheeks, pleasure and pride tangling in her chest. Thank you. That means something, coming from another artist. He gestured toward the debris field around them, where morning light revealed the true scope of the fallout. But I also saw this. Hundreds of shell casings dotted the grass like fallen leaves. Strips of colored paper fluttered from tree branches. Near the water's edge, a great blue heron picked delicately through the shallows, occasionally rejecting something artificial from its beak. Rosa felt her shoulders tighten. I know. I see it too. I've always seen it. We clean up, we use biodegradable materials where we can, but... She trailed off, watching the heron's careful movements. It's never going to be zero impact, is it? Owen answered in a gentle tone. Probably not, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing, or that it can't be done better. They worked in companionable silence for a while, filling buckets with debris as the sun climbed higher. Rosa's trained eye spotted camouflaged casings. Owen's modified rake turned out to be equipped with a magnet for catching metal components. He suddenly spoke as they moved to a new section of the field. Tell me about your grandfather. You mentioned Agent Orange yesterday. Rosa's hands stilled on a piece of cardboard. She wasn't used to talking about Abuelo with strangers, but something in Owen's tone invited confidence. Sergeant First Class Eduardo Alvarez, she said finally. 2 tours in Vietnam, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. He came home in 1971 and spent the next 40 years slowly dying from the chemicals they sprayed over there. She found another casing, this one marked with her own initials, a shell she'd crafted specially for the finale. But he never let it make him bitter. Every 4th of July, he'd sit in his lawn chair right down there by the water and watch our show with tears streaming down his face. What did he say about it? The fireworks? Rosa's throat tightened with memory. That it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. That after what he'd witnessed in the war, he needed to believe people could use fire to create joy instead of just destruction. The last show he saw, 2 months before he died, he told me that every burst of light was a prayer that the world would choose beauty over violence, creation over destruction. Owen had stopped working, his full attention on her words. That's profound. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassed by the tears. I miss him. Sorry, I don't usually get this emotional about... Don't apologize. Owen's voice was rough. My own grandfather fought in the Pacific. Never talked about it much, but he spent his retirement building birdhouses, hundreds of them. Said he needed to give something back to the world after all the taking. They looked at each other across the morning light, understanding passing between them like a current, both carrying the weight of family history, both trying to honor the past while building something better for the future. Owen pulled out his phone. I have an idea, something I want to show you, but first... He showed her a video. Have you ever seen a drone light show? The screen filled with hundreds of tiny aircraft, each carrying LED lights, moving in perfect synchronization to create 3-dimensional images in the night sky. A phoenix rising from flames, cascading waterfalls of color that moved and flowed without gravity's constraints. A heart that pulsed with light and transformed into a flock of birds. "It's beautiful," Rosa admitted, "but it's not the same. There's no impact, no physical presence. Fireworks have weight, substance. You feel them in your chest when they explode." Owen started using his hands to articulate his ideas as he warmed up to his topic. What if we could combine them? Drones for the intricate patterns, fireworks for the emotional impact. Reduce the chemical load by 60% while actually increasing the visual complexity. Rosa stared at the strength of his hands, glanced at the video, her mind racing. The timing would be incredibly complex. You'd need someone who understands both pyrotechnics and programming. He bit his lip, then turned and spoke again. "I know programming. You know pyrotechnics." The implication hung between them. A collaboration, a fusion of their different approaches to creating beauty. Rosa leaned away from him. "My family would never go for it. They're traditionalists. Miguel still loads shells the exact same way Abuelo taught him." He bowed his head in thought, then glanced at her, his eyes focused on hers. "What if we started small? A test run, maybe next spring at the Arts Festival. Show them it can work." Before Rosa could respond, voices carried across the field. Miguel and two of her cousins were approaching with a wheelbarrow, their expressions curious. "Need backup?" Miguel called out, though his eyes were fixed on Owen with obvious interest. As her family drew closer, she saw Owen straighten slightly, preparing for introductions. She realized she wanted them to like him, wanted them to see past the environmental lecture to the artist underneath. "Miguel, this is Owen Brooks. Owen, my brother Miguel." The two men shook hands, taking each other's measure with the careful assessment of males protecting their territory. Miguel broke the silence first. "Saw you watching the show last night," Miguel said. "What did you think?" Owen waved his hands as he spoke. "Honestly, it was incredible. Your sister has a real talent. Though I'll admit, I'm curious about ways to reduce the environmental impact without losing the artistic integrity." Miguel's eyebrows rose. "Oh, what did you have in mind?" As Owen began explaining his drone concept, Rosa found herself studying his animated gestures, the passion in his voice when he talked about creating beauty without destruction. Her cousins peppered him with technical questions, and she was surprised to discover he had thoughtful answers for most of them. Miguel put his hands on his hips. "It's an interesting idea, but we'd need to see it in action. Theory and practice aren't always the same thing." Owen leaned into the conversation. "Agreed, which is why I was hoping to convince your sister to collaborate on a small-scale test." All eyes turned to Rosa. She felt the weight of family expectation, of a tradition, of her grandfather's legacy pressing down on her shoulders. But she also felt something else: curiosity, excitement, the thrill of artistic possibility. "One test," she heard herself say. "Small scale. If it works, we'll talk about expansion. If it doesn't," she shrugged. "At least we'll know." Owen's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. "Deal." As they finished the cleanup and walked toward the parking lot, Rosa's shoulder brushed against Owen's, sending electricity shooting through her nervous system. The contact was brief, accidental, but the awareness that followed lingered like the scent of gunpowder in the morning air. Owen held out a hand. "Lunch?" he asked as they reached their vehicles. "I know a place by the river where they serve those really good tacos I mentioned." Rosa knew the place. She touched his hand briefly, but kept walking to her truck. "Only if we sit outside. I want to see if any turtles show up. I owe them an apology." Owen's smile followed her as she climbed into her truck. As she drove toward town, she caught herself checking the rearview mirror to make sure he was following. The 4th had ended, but something new was just beginning. Bright as stars, uncertain as summer lightning, and possibly more dangerous than anything she'd ever lit with a fuse. But for the first time in years, she was ready to take that risk.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Stories from Renee Rose Hawthorne. I hope this tale brought a little warmth and romance to your day. If you enjoyed what you heard and would like to experience more of my clean, heartwarming love stories, you will find novellas and short story collections on Amazon. Until next time, when I'll have another sweet romance to share with you, this is Renee Rose Hawthorne wishing you love, joy, and happy endings wherever you go.